Dhamma Chöngten Ten Teshé Shé Wāng Chā Chöng Pō Yāng Tā Pō Sō Pē Sāng Rī Pā Tāng Xā Sū Tēn Pā Tē Wā Shé Pā Chū Tēn Chēn Pā Chū Pō Tē Kā Lō Chē Wā Lā Nā Mē Pā Lā Tāng Mē Nāng Chē Tēn Pā Sāng Chē Chāng Tēn Pē Chā Wā Chā Chā Tō Pā Lā Shāng Tsēng Chū Tō Chā Sū Chē Wā Kāng Tsē Kāng Nian Sū Chē Tāng Tsē Sā Chēn Tēn Nā Kōng Pā Tē ngā nian jī tēn tēn nā chō chē sōng, tē tsē kē pā chē lā shāng tsē. Nā tō kā ngā chō tō sō sā wā, yī shē chā tō sē chē nēn pō. Chā pā jī tēn sō nā lā ngē wā, gōng pō chū nī chē lā shāng tsē. Sēn chō tēn pā chē mēn tā yé xiā, sēn tō chā wā chē lā shāng tsē. 对着见到四宝送王节，两面见见就老相争。广播突见接电报，当街见别电报。三闹一天叫做节，天天写了相争。他边的唱着王节，给人给送来着。接到等到九九八，先觉就老相争。这年这月朗阳的，老婆到老少的。先给东北一点点，给的那样相子，对吧？这样们交心，给我别装作吧，让给三年用说的，这年上街的吧，刚马着的马面当，就马是安全吧，没让落到真道吧，都是就能得到。色能的月堂节日八夜，各方到年就就这的，各当那当七月老主，随便错能着王着我哟。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of a lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra. Like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, and no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight, and so on, until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on, up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, The mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
Namadang Gombo Juzen Jambi Yana Shanse Lo Kage Lo Zhu Jini Jini Nida Nanda Shose Ye Jini Dengin Jijin Zishe Nijin Doga Leban Zin Kanda Sibi Zara Mari Mindong Dongin Shizu Ye 多做跟那不接大自然那主角样的颂，周到千多年末年农历节家中这最近，马日面色冬年年过去年正在这热闹。天天大街小街大自然的日子，叫声都远过。 就说就当今年今日到里面，江边养老的，阿拉巴扎那的，阿拉巴扎那的，阿拉巴扎那的，这点姐姐见到我在。 道理定木明白少些年，高当天就雄鹿多把也，罗着不别弄，多多也多也是留也就，修也修也没有也多，找也留也。 牛呀牛呀牛呀我呀牛，松呀牛呀牛呀多，牛呀牛呀牛呀我呀，多呀狗呀多呀多呀小呀罗。 学呀么，我也说呀，就是老呀么，多呀么呀，就呀孬，就呀就呀个呀个呀孬，千呀就呀就呀就呀呢。 就呀多呀错呀别，六呀少呀走呀么了，少呀九呀九呀九呀九么，哦呀多呀多呀当个着。 面对那个那样大呀也没有呀，莫念造业那么真不见， 道给修边的的就能，法人前别国内接宗的，故宗多结无主做多数，愿做给来学员准备过，大愿祝愿人王公愿颂，马列现象结结随别多。了解做我的那所我的，多解千波的些多解障，就解的罗波那那罗波，边中中边波那阿的相，鸟里西罗吉罗所我的，相波同灭一念当主的，就的对月的当着边边。西藏各桑六年四年吧，了解识别解了所望的，两人月面书记留住当，大问大宝这边可有钱。上界观众泡泡要是说，沙漠大月见了所望的，西中当边中安阿的上，高当顶边面包中等见，南就能是过去送拉送，高当拉玛那拉所望的，刚见新的自己中阿宝。我到这边，我说就早见，到我这边到不开中间，要是就把钱拿所完的，就算过的那么多节长，看了讲的新年去做年，就到天幕我住这边，这些老妈那拉所完的。让家送着跟了到一面，给上他把这边就问就，在外这边打开这把眼，算在新年到了说完的，叫我跟到养到那么等，这边就这边了老学见。撒旦那些也得少做年，多久讲给个人多也就上街就当做街就当了。想就不多，当年就做见，大概去这边做那见，到了平时上街就不休，上街就做街就那想就不多，当年就做。大概去这边做那见，到了平时上街就不休，上街就。昨天就能拿上就不多，当年就算大概就这边做那件，到了平时上街就不说。哎呀，他那个是电马头都电马那也，俺去西北的，那着了平时上街住，俺去年把的着了平时上街住不就送把那爷爷，那俺做个可对呢，上不了创业吧去，你这假期上了嘛对吧？也这申请就是在我一年都有别说的，记着啊。这位这些生土着千万人呢，你对不？别那哪里去不可能那就的，你个人年纪轻别一绕接不一片的的是我写不小送的，年纪轻不一绕的久呢，你上街就点不行了，前年前那的说说两年前那样，年纪没纪，你年纪轻不一跟上去都要突然去插入讲了，你刚不说的就那个嘛的，虚记的，你不得学个生的说牛了。
Yes, as we have recited the refuge formula that may I attain state of enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. So as we have recited, we should not just verbalizing the words, but we should internalize the indication of the verse itself. So, in other words, when one is reciting this verse, not just by reciting the verse itself, but one should at least have some kind of, genuine feeling by reflecting one's mind upon the meaning of this verse. As we find in the abbreviated, prayers of the Lam Rim, where it says, once very engaging in the practice of the stages of the path to enlightenment must be done on the basis of cultivation of compassion. And with this, may the teachings of the Buddha be, established furthermore. So therefore, if one's motivation is based on compassion, cultivation of compassion, receiving the teachings or doing the practice, it will really become a meaningful meaningful for sustenance of the teachings of the Dharma.
난데 당아서 자침보 심은 거지. 가드이나 sembalhöle ma ba ani sembalhöle bo ma se de ani nga so ge tere ji ko so bo ba chu ji de she ge ni ka sem go go ya na ya ji ge do ba ji chue be dang da dang ji rong do ji se be dang da so de ji ma yin ba ani chu de ne le ba lu o je ne ni ngo ne ji semba de chu de ma je bi to ne ani nga so go go ji len to ro je na so chu ne bi ka la ani zubola de za ne ka nge ma de ma to ka ri xie so ta de ji pi ji de le nong ju so de ji ta ne so so ge ji xin ju de ji je de go ji le so na 근데 zubo children le samba children le ma nga so nga chejo de samba children le ba chi je tu go de pe mesi ke chmo
So it's very important that when one is receiving the teachings, and particularly that we are taking a time, ourselves of time, and engaging in these discussions on this immaculate discourse for hour and a half. So what is important for us is just not being yourself present in these discussions of this discourse physically, but rather one should participate in these discussions of this discourse mentally. In other words, one should take an opportunity to mentally engage in this discourse.
아 당은 저 되는다 당은 저 셈이 당은 되게 소소게 대사 되니라 마 sembalhöle pe su to bo so ne chi ma yin ba ni chi be te pu yang yi ko yo mo so ne chi na ma le ba an le ma po so so ne rang gen de ani ta da ka ri che go do sa na so ka ri che go sa na ro chi go so yin na ne nga de ne zin da chi ne go sa zin da ka ri ne na na de bi chue le go na che le go ka ri che de yin sa ne ro chi go so yin na ne nge de che ge se shu chi xie ya ma re 아니 내가 최초때 내가 선바도 줄을 커버지다 아니 딱 너네 전에 대지 쳐더래 내가도 다도 강의잖아 대지 쳐더지 된다라 내가 되는 전에 내가 여생이게 아니 선바도 흐르면 뭐 된대 쳐는 지제 아니 랑게 되는 나가 되니라 아니 템바투 배운 같이 다지 되는 게 나래 집에 나만나지 시지도 전화 볼라 아니 지면 지선 나마 집에 좀 같이 송바나게 투 제시면 좀 받게 소리지 있잖아 아니 지 라라게 쳐선 베시 넘버네 있잖아 아니 슈댕에 지미 받체 아니 소소 대사 되니라 아니 지 가서 되는 장라도는 좀 소리지 많이 봐 아니 다주 콜라데 이티네 세고라다 맞은 가데 소소게 대사기 사체 되는 친제는 봐 산나도네 근데 콜라데 이티네 선제 요소 줘봐대 아니 대리 맞속에 최친이 져서 되라 아니 대지 써서 되라 해도 여사 아니 대달에 요소 줘봐래지 오늘 집이 대원이지 여러 잖아 근데 동네에 몇 번째 여러 잖아 대체는 아니 맞서 되는 쇼비 아마 대달에 가르쳐고도 근데 가르쳐고도 저거지 천원제 있지는 내가 저 되세 제토나 근데 배 메시 추추서 좋아해다
So one should receive these teachings with a very calm mind, and not letting one's mind influenced by mental agitations or dullness, and try to broaden one's mind when one's receiving these teachings. So with this, on the basis of broadening of one's mind and cultivating appropriate motivations, then one should ask the question to oneself, what am I doing at this point? For what purpose that I'm being in this, participating in these teachings of the Dharma? So your purpose of participating in this teachings of the Dharma is to bring one's mind closer towards teachings of the Dharma for achievement of happiness and overcome sufferings. It is with this motivations that one should visualize in the space before oneself Buddha Shakyamuni, who is then surrounded by all those great lineage masters or the lineage gurus of the great deities to the stages of the path to enlightenment. And imagine that they are actually gazing at you delightfully, as we find in the Lapa Amatsongkhapa's Guru Yoga, where it's stated that Guru actually gazes at oneself in a very delightful manner. So in the same manner, one should think about all those, root and lineage gurus were gathered in the space before oneself, or gazing at oneself with in a very delightful manner. And then imagining yourself being in their presence. And not only that oneself, but one is surrounded by all other sentient beings. And then from the depth of one's heart, think about, may all sentient beings have happiness and overcome sufferings. May I be able to receive these teachings to establishing all the sentient beings to the state of complete happiness. So with this, let's take a minute to meditate. So in brief, our meditation is cultivating an irreversible faith towards the object of refuge and cultivating a compassion towards other sentient beings. With these motivations, teachings that you are receiving today is the lamp of the 3 world, great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment.
전적이 최대 송바보 스트레스는 죽은 선법된 제법의 저와 덤버 투변 홍보네 해서데 아니 다 자가지 벤주 되네네 벽 강쟁이 좀라 아니 용서 잡아 아니 장골라마 좀 봐세데 아니 덤버들 덤버 니바나이 아니 루루 니바다고 전적이 뭐네지 서버대 자체 강격전을 도바명에게 아니 전적이 주부 담바 나주 피드셔가지 얘는 송샤죠 아니 집에 담바 대다기 가는 신비 랑데 쇼리 제샤죠 jel을 랑린 살라그라
So then, the teachings that you are receiving today is great teachers teach us about enlightenment. And who is the one who actually taught this immaculate teachings of the Dharma? So when speaking about who taught, when one is asking a question of the individual who taught these teachings, then the first outline, the major outline, comes into picture, which is the greatness of the authors given in order to exhibit the teachings as a noble source, thinking by which actually enables one to think about that the great teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, then there are his followers of the great Indian masters and the great Tibetan masters, particularly of the one who actually taught these teachings. Of the particular teaching that we are discussing is the Lama Tsongkhapa, is the one who taught this great teachers on the stages of the path to enlightenment. And Lama Tsongkhapa is also known as the second Buddha, or sometimes it's also called as a second Nagarjuna. So whose teachings is so profound, unlike any other teachings, and then who actually compile all the stages of the path that can be found in all those vast teachings of the Buddha, is what we call is great teachers, so the stage of the path to enlightenment, the teachings that we are dealing with.
당연히 취지 지원라 아니나 아니 저서 시원라 이제 아니 현주 전문의 소모도 어미 장서 주네 아니 마지 니거는 상주 세례 소모나 얘기 아니 장홀라마 종합 첨보네 야 주비 상제 이 바도게 동화 연수 주비 서로 연수 주비 빠티 뚜뚜 제도나 아니 어미 니거 저거데 아니 상주 라는 첨보 담바래 소와이나 아니 한번 찾자고 말해
So just as we find in the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, by churning milk, one will be able to obtain the essence of the milk, which is the butter. Similarly, if one go through the browsing of these teachings of the Buddha, of great deities on the stages of path to enlightenment, one will be able to find the essence of the teachings of the Bodhisattva and Tantra.
다 취지 지와지 다 년시 대다시 멤버스 당가서 다들 경험제자 되긴 되버지 네 가디에는 되는 거저 최친이 찍고 말해 소소 논을 많이 친구지면서 너고 매나야 아니 경험 내내 멤버지 지와이나 아니 취지 바자 아니 내 단지로 하는 이 정도 치고 찍고지 말해 배는 저 가서 내가 되진 로고야나 지그 뒤서 로가 나기 배셔 쏴대 줘로 대나기 그 취기 경로되게 새로 지와이나 아니 뒤서 로가 나기 아니 선한테 쏴대 차용을
So, as I mentioned earlier, that motivation is something that is, it plays a critical role in accumulation of one's merit while one is receiving the teachings. Not only that when one is receiving the teachings, but even when one is reciting the mantra, six-syllable mantra of Om Mani Padme Hum, if one has cultivated appropriate motivations, the time that you have spent to recite the mantras enables one to accumulate tremendous amount of merits. So therefore, it's crucial for us to be able to cultivate appropriate motivations to accumulate merits.
되지. 당가서 이제 바 담방가 저 하나 맞다 저 바 런치 사와 신이 때 비슷하다. 때는 로치다 장이면 니 생이 되지. 내가 저기 내 그때는 때 선언 되지 마고 아이나 런치 사와 신이 때 그래서디 아마 되게 단다 소리지 인비 선언지만 소소기지 러던도는 개개인적인 바 야보지 거래 생이 선언이 밀레비니 가도 맞지. 지 개개인들 야보 제급이 선언되지만도 소소기 비게들 로저들 내급이 선언된 밀레 이내가 전부 차기도 되게 단단하게만 손으로 뭐지게 시제를 내는 게 신의 뜻이 걸으시고 자체뭐 시금에 양 고알로발렌저서 등도 같아서요 고알렌도지 말에나 아니 개개 아버지 제시 세비 소리지마도 소소게 될라 템비게 로저야 볼렌비 선언된 밀레나 신앙도
So then the fourth and the outlines of the major outline of this Lam Rim is the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions, and then how to rely on the teachers, which is the root of path, and how the students train their mind after having relied on the teachers. And it actually talks about importance of the practice of the guru devotions. So now when it comes to the teachings of practice of guru devotions, and sometimes I feel that, the people might have a mere thinking of being good to guru, very nice to guru or masters, not thinking about development of one's own spiritual realizations. It is for this reason, Kyabji Songrinpoche, the previous Songrinpoche, has stated at one time, whenever he gives the teachings to the Westerners, he will not give much teachings on this guru devotions because they might, take a different sense. They might take a, might misunderstand. There's a chances of having a misunderstanding of the teachings of the guru devotions.
당한도고 아테네로 제다장이 발라니 이제 라지 자와 레 라지 셴이 되게 텐도로 제다장이 발라니 이제 데이터는 님벌님 비주 그거도 님벌은 제단님 비주니 이제 동버지 다 님벌 제단님 비주라니 라지 나자는 게 받지 세다 님벌님 증거지 동버지 님벌님 증거로 송 주부 충분도 대모야 나지를 많이 하서네 주부 된다 대모 주부 챔피언 나지를 많이 하서네 이제 동버니지 주부 챔피언 나지를 많이 하서네 송 대전은 주변고 생지 관나된바 세대 제다 지비수 생지는 셔발로 제제 다 동버니지 다 생지는 셔발로 지라송 생지는 로발로 비진세 터시레레 월로베 상제면 주와 된바 로발로베 많이 셔바지 다 동버니지 다 송발라니 테바침 버절라로제도 치버도 도지 테발로 제제 다 동벌로송 상세 로발로데 좀 장내 제세데 넘버송 손에 제단에 비수제 동문지 손에 제단에 비수라니 셔버절라로제도 레 베체 또 아까로비제 텔로로비rem바 텔라 제단을 말 강로로비제 텔라 제달로비 로바나 디세 텔라 제달로비rem바치 텔라 제달로비rem발니 니 셔버절라로제 치바도 파세 타마니로 제제 다 동문지 다 파신 타마니로 로실라 주인사요现在的劳动偏些吧 대니 땡인 적근데 디제 땡바 신나라 도로도 야와 대니가 광고비 진세 고랭이 바 소소려 제제 다 도망간데 소소려 질라니 신나라 저 라동로 제 다 도모지 다 라동로 질레제 라동 저 땡바 라동 저 rab도 야와 라동 광비 저 광비 라동 주베 제제 다 동보라 송 장대당 년대 조선을 뭐서 르주지 군바지 비치제 다정와 도만이 이제 다와 땡라 배바지 다 동반이 이제 다 편은 법발니 대권한연을 주변에 받아 대권한연 대랑 배가 뭐지 다 동반지 대권한연 대랑 배가 송 가장 문제바 뭐서 대타랑 관계 로시바 시바텔라 때는 도와질라 제별에 뭐지 다 동보라 송 가장 문제 그 배제세 뭐마제 배제로가 바랑로 샤바지 당가서 랑로 샤바지 다 랑로 샤바데 뭐지 때 가장 문서 아니 대전도 좀 맞아. 대단지 제발 좀 맞아. 아시네. 맞아게. 다 상제지 살람도 이게 더더 싫어 이제는 맞아. 시거스 봐봐 싫어 차도지. 싫어 차도서는 싫어지 정대나 배버지. 아니 대라 아니 또 치셔되네. 싫어 손대지 랑라 때네. 아니 요모 제니 바차다 제바 방과 인자데 아니 맞아 거스 봐봐. 아니 돈이도 하통선에 가르치래 세그래서 아니 되게 카톨릭도 다 단다 쳐보시나.
So we're on the chapter of the actual object to be negated, right? So this is the teachings on the wisdom. Because when we talk about attaining state of enlightenment, it that requires two factors: the wisdom aspect, the completion of one's perfect practice of the wisdom, method aspect, and the perfect practice of the wisdom aspect. So out of two, at the at this point, we are dealing with the discussions on how do we cultivate with wisdom aspect, and it is through cultivation of this of shamatha and the vipassana, or the special insight of ultimate nature of reality, one will be able to eliminate one's two obscurations with their imprints and to attain state of complete enlightenment. So therefore, at this particular point, we are actually dealing with how one can actually cultivate this special insight, or the lakdong, or the special insight, to be able to generate wisdom that understands ultimate nature of reality.
되지. 맞아 시에도 살하도 시에다 거스 법은 가서 아니 돈이 맞아 돈이 또 뭐두베데 가래 가고 가실 지도 그래서나 아니 맞아 녀주데 시드니데 예 아니 돈이도 별하라지를 제마도레스 아니 카도 돈이도 별하라지를 제마도 가래 제거래서 라소나 아니 어 리피 가자 덴바 주반 셈바당 아니 덴바 주반이 제제네 아니 맞아 강에데 제거래스 아니 대 단단 것인 거래스 되지.
So what actually obstruct us from gaining the realization of emptiness? What really prevents us from actually gaining the realization of emptiness is our two obscurations, as we talked about earlier: the obscuration to liberation and obscuration to omniscience. So therefore, in order to eliminate this obscuration of these two obscurations, one need to identify the object of negation that is to be negated by reasonings. And so without which, one's understanding of emptiness will be obstructed by the grasping at in itself, grasping at, in other words, intrinsic self and intrinsic phenomena. So therefore, identification of object which is to be negated is very important.
아야, 방어도 돼다. 가슴 것도 돼다. 아니, 지당 가서 타녀도 나다 나이 생이 가서 뭐에 내시기 단다랑 배제 동들이 로들이 쳐다가 아니 나다 나이 생이 로다. 아니 나다 나이 생이 제데 뭐에 내시기 돈을 따라 제베서나 아니 뭐에 내시기 돈에 아니 저랑 따다 돼 말이에스. 저랑이 나다 나이 생이 돼 아니 뭐 때문에 주변 나다 나이와 지는 뭔지 잘 타니에 싸빙 하다 가요. 지처럼 이거 싸우는 재미도 인산에 아니 되게 단다 받으면서 아니 라와치 못이네 시리에 제세대래서라고 하시죠.
So now here, what is important for us to understand when we talk about I or self or mind, our way of understanding of self or I or mind is not something that is conventionally existence. We're unable to identify the conventional existence of the self or I or mind, in other words, because it is because of that not being able to identify or not being able to understand that conventionally existence of the I or the self or mind, one is grasping at the independent or the intrinsic self or I or the mind, which becomes an obstruction for one's own understanding of selflessness or emptiness.
Ay, tak ngani de na mi pa te la che tan zim bi number ne se te ina. Ngani ta yin da. Mi pa te la che ta ta wana ji ta ki mi pa kan chi le mi go re sa la wa yin na se te. Mi pa te la che ta mi bi number ne se jun de le. De la je ji tsu la ta wa ne nga ta nga ye nyang ba te ta bi number la shu ba. xie sun be sa. Rang ge chen ji zhu bi rang jin yue ba zang den zin ba min ji are rang jin yue ba zang den zin ba min ji nga wo nyang den zin ba shi go so yang jun zhe le se te re.
So now let's read through the text, which is page 214. And we're on the second paragraph, the third paragraph, where it says, with regard to how the object of observation is apprehended. I'll read again. With regard to how that object of observation is apprehended. Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way commentary says, concerning that a view of perishing aggregates operates within thoughts of I and a mind. Thus, it is not simply a conception of intrinsic existence by way of intrinsic character. It must be a conception thinking I. That explanation of the middle way commentary also says.
Maya, te yi nga zo se sho ka ri cha ri na, ta nga zo yi yong la che zo na ni che me nyong le ma do yong la na ni che to na, ani ji ta se nge de da dang se se ni yo de she to ge. Be ni ji ta se na, be na nga zo ge su su pong bo, be na nga yi pong bo se de na ba cha ba na, ni nga si be na ba cha bi ka la, kan ji le na ba cha ge za na, ani nga rang shi ju ba zang jing ho ma re s. Ani ti nya do la, ten de ki ten ha wo nya bi ge lo de shu chen bo shu ji re s. Ni nga ji ta. 아니 나이 풍부세를 가라 풍부 파스데 자 코란시 두가 상징어 말이 곧이 롱셔바 셔버 본데 진 제메드 소는 짐베 아니 티슈체마 슈제레 야송어.
So here now it's actually identifying the difference between the jigda or the grasping at the perishing aggregate and the self-grasping, the difference between the two. So, grasping at the perishing aggregate is the conception of, in other words, that it says the view of perishing aggregates operates within the thought of I and a mind. By observing the I or mind and having an idea of being intrinsically existence of I or mind. That is what is meant by perishing, view of perishing aggregates.
배는 가서 가사 신지 라신 주번 zembi 코로 라신 주번 zem바 짜리마데 나오냐 별로 지고 말와. 아니 단단 가서기 싸워니는 가서 매버서 등에데 아니 부기는 담보 쉬우지 세네. 같이지나 그 템보 쉬우지 가 로셔 보이는 나도 오지 두세비 진데된 지달래. 아니 가사 신 라신 주번 zem바텔라 단지 짜제레마도 지다 말했어. 지도 소소 지다이나 인지 미지 나다 나이냐 별로 쉬우지 못해 봐도 거래서 하더라.
So here now, grasping at the self of person, it does not necessarily be the view of perishing aggregates. It is mere grasping of self, but it's not a view of perishing aggregates. The view of perishing aggregate is a conception of I, that you have an idea of the conception of I or mine, which is so strong. And unlike the other grasping, thoughts, it has such a strong, innately existence of very, very strong and, vigorous idea of being the self I or this mind, something that exists intrinsically.
대양 다게 다메바 쿤드 추발레 방원 제베 셰 미바치비 다데 다메바테 라신 메바 토반 젠단가이 고네 방원 손베 셰럽데 도션 젠바 고소 대양 간사 랑게 무 주반 젠바 yinbe rangi tsenji chi chupi nga wo nyam dan zenpa wo nga yen zenpi jita yang te tsune sheba sha wo songda.
And it says, the explanation of the middle way commentary says that just the view of perishing aggregate is to be eliminated. And it is eliminated upon understanding the selflessness of the self. Thus, Chandrakirti says that you eliminate the view of the perishing aggregates by knowing the selflessness, the non-intrinsic existence of the self, that its object of observations, thereby contradicting the way that it is apprehended by the view of perishing aggregates. Hence, the view of perishing aggregate must apprehend the opposite of wisdom, which knows the selflessness. Moreover, since view of perishing aggregate is a conception of the person as essentially existing, it is a conception of an I that exists by way of its intrinsic character.
pecheto jebashin chi kozo tadaran degi meshi tan jiya che kanje degi ngonde tanji de chibare ene ngansin ji pena dam ngansin ji ta de mebo songe de seresa na ene da meba toba ji de de da meba toba de re ene da meba toba de ge de ene da den jiba de pawon ji kodan ji tan go chi pawon ya na dosho tata chi pawon ya na ene ngayo ji ji ta de ya ene nga 다음에 또 되게 아니 나요 다음에 받아 다랑 가서 다른 집 다랑 방그레세 그래서 고진의 집안에
So since self-grasping can be eliminated by understanding the selflessness of person, or the selflessness of I, in the same manner, one can eliminate the self grasping at phenomena or grasping at mind by understanding the selflessness of mind.
디오데 단여셔나 나당 나요 민시비 가서 제세요 반sem반에 가서게 더도 뭐비 마리바 임베 녀모 마이바 메저로 선테레 아니 이제 가서신 얘네 나오냐 봐 만세나요 가서 제스 주반 zem바데 네 가서게 당제는 녀모 임비 다 추지 당제는 세거라 다 당제는 선에 추지 당제는 녀모 셰바데 오마타지 지금 tö모미 쳐줘라.
So then, using this as an example, you should be able to understand the view of perishing aggregate that is conception of mind, even when they do not conceive I or mind. Conception of the person as a substantial existence are still the case of ignorance that misconceived as self or person. So it is not the case that they are not affections.
장게 ngö 주비 장신 싸라 다데자바 당치제 ngā o nyāmba sāngchū lō yī la dādi jāba nī lē sā, tōmbō nē rīpī gāja yī la, shima nē tānyā dō dō bē mēngō kō sōng dō.
Then it says, as in the passage just cited, self refers to the mere essential or intrinsic existence, and also refers to the object of an awareness that simply thinks I. Of those two, the former is the object negated by reason, whereas the latter is accepted conventionally, so it is not refuted.
ngā tsō kī gāshā ngōnzi bī kāla dē ngōnzi tō kō, tā ngā ngā chī ngā tsō chē tā ndēsā tā hēn chē tā yoyō pā rī, rāshō ngā tsō rāpa chē shō tā ngā tsō jī lī yor tā, ngā tsō kī rāpa chē shō tā lō mō nē, ngōnzi tō kō mā rī mā tō, dē, tōmbō lā, ngā ngō chū sē tī kō rō tō mē tī chū sē rō, tō mē tī chū pī, ngā rī chī lā ngā tsō shā tāng rō tāng chē dē dō rī, dē kā gō yā gāshā tē rē sī. ngā wā nyāmbā tsāng ngā tsū chēwā ndēne chēwā shimā rō sē nē rē, lēn rē tēn rē jī bī dā sē nē rē, tēn rē jī tāng chēwā kī yuā sē kō rō. Tē ngā wā nyāmbā tsāng jī lō tē rē, tē gāsā tōngyū tō kī lō kī kā kī mā rē sō dō wā.
So it's clearly mentioned here that says that of two, the former is the object that is to be negated by the reasoning, whereas the latter is accepted conventionally, so it is not refuted. So now, what we are talking about here is now it talks about what needs to be refuted. Just mere having the conception of I or self is not something that it is not to say that you are having a grasping at self or grasping at independent self or grasping at independent mind. But what is to be refuted here, it's important to understand, is to grasping at the I or self that exists independently without depending on any other causes and conditions. And that conception of independent self is refuted, not just self or I that you have the conception of, it's just mere self or I, but the independent self that is to be refuted.
Tā ngā tsō nēngā chē shō tā ngā tsāng ngōn sē sē tā hā lē kē chē mō kā lē kō rā, ngā tsāng sē tā kē tō wā lā tēn tē chā mō rā kō lē kō rā. ngā tsō chī tēn tē rā pā yī kō lē tē ngā tsō pē nā shīn tā kō lō sē ngā jī zō yu tō kō lā tēn tē rā pā kō lē kō lō sē shīn tā sē tō yōng sō tsō pē tsō pā rā wā chī lā ngā tsō lō yī lē chā tō kō rā, tēn yō pā. 아니 딱 나창세 이게 댄서데 조시 타니 자제레서로 그러 진짜 나창 증언 좀 아니 댄데 참인 거는 과래 그러다 신도는 갈거도 맞게 봐 장수증 아예선에 다들로 되는 로들이 봐 인샤샤제는 시당 로다제는 로들에다 신주판의 제일 별거라 집에데 나선 나선에 지 가서 댄데게 라반에 대도 소리지 야자 대도 소리지 뭐 말어.
So now here what is difficult for us is to identify the mere self. As in, it is very difficult to identify. To have this, to be able to identify the mere self, for that one needs to have the proper understanding of the subtle level of dependent originations, not just a gross level of dependent originations like chariots, and that's due to the combination of the different parts which makes up the chariots, right? Which is the actual example of the gross level of dependent originations. But the subtle level when it comes to the subtle level of dependent originations, one should understand that I or self, existence of the I of self is mere imputed by terms and concepts. And that's, this is the idea or the notion that one should have within one's mind, will enable one to have an understanding of subtle level of dependent originations. That's all.
tichi, tendryo chi ma to peche yung sama to, tendryo che, ane de do de, tongpo ne te kagu ma resi di, ta nga su ki pena xe pa, kansa chi ka malo chi, nga su denchi pena pumpa do wan, denchi chi kane chala re chi le, chi je wa ina, denchi chala de lo yi ya zang chi tende ten, nga su kwa chi ya lengwa ma re, kono tanchi de ne xe ya ye pa, karisa rangshin nguwa tu pa, kono rang peche tong de ma to, ko lo yi ya zang chi se te, kyu shol kono rogo ya ma ra.
So let's think about, the object in front of oneself. Just imagine that object that is in front of oneself on the table. Take it as the vase or the flower vase that is on the table in front of oneself. The way we are actually looking at that, the vase on the table, and we have a notion of the vase being independently existence, or without depending on any other factors or causes and conditions, let alone that we have a notion of that very existence of the vase is by means of, imputed by, concept and the term, but completely, concretely existence of the space of self. We're not having the notion of such vase that is being in front of oneself is something that is imputed by one thought and concept, thoughts and term.
chero ngubi nesi la nengi chala tila tata nondo yore la na pe hang bete sata ura ma to nguye nesi chena tanda nga suke long shio shenpi chala yangsu zoba la tata de bete nondo yore ya da.
Although one might think that what one is seeing in front of oneself, the object that is in front of oneself, and one think that one is really looking at the reality of that object. However, if you really think very carefully, the way in which that we understand, which we understand that how actual mode of existence of the object that is in front of us is completely erroneous. Our way of understanding is completely, mistaken.
Ya, kanti chena no wara sena nengi chala de oi hya sanji ma to kono nene chupa trai semu sanji mewa singi ti kwa le bure.
How we are mistaken to understand this actual mode of existence of the object that is in front of us is because in reality, such object in front of us is mere imputed by one's thoughts and term. There's no other than that. But the way we understand, the notion that we have, the actual existence of that particular object is something that doesn't, not having an idea of something that is imputed by, thoughts and the term.
저기 런던 나시 정원에 따지 제여 나면은 시기 선발로 전화 질래네 따지 지제거로 오늘 있잖아 but 지 주택이 가서 따와 천생 계천지 지나 양난 거에 대해서 이나
So it is now time for us to really to analyze that. Is it something that that we are talking about here is how the mode of existence of the things in event, the way we understand the things in them, is it really something that is really imputed by concept and a term, or something that is other than that? So we really need to analyze.
대는 지달린 지 밑반 명고바 땡지 대이 남빈 진당네 진당네 장게 뭐 주비 나이베 대명고바 메데 페나 다탄진지 다탄지 밑바 담다바 가사 담명고장 대신 다타방고바 몽고 고바 민가와 셴노 소 대는 바바여 세체스
So it says now, therefore, this passage indicates that you do not refute the object which is observed by the innate view of perishing aggregates. However, the way that its aspect is apprehended is essentially exists in I. So it is not that you do not refute that way of apprehending. For example, you do not refute the sound that is sound that is the object observed by a conception that sound is permanent, but you do refute the permanent sound that is the referent of the object of conception. So it is not the contradictions.
야,
This
특별히
case is
보도
similar. Last one.
다음에 또 비실하게 지다 가요도 거라 아니 단지 가서게 다 장생이야 단지 학생도 가봐 말이스 아니 다도 주번 좀 가변나 담다 봐도 로되게 다 가고 말어 다다지 다다바도 가고로 아sen도.
So it says now, when one gains the understanding of selflessness of person or the selflessness of phenomena, one is not actually refuting the self itself. The mere self is not refuted. What we are refuting here is the independent self or the intrinsic self that is being refuted. We're not actually refuting the actual object of self itself. Similarly, when it comes to the refuting of permanent sound, we're actually here refuting the permanent sound, but we're not actually refuting the sound, right? Sound is the basis, but we're not refuting the basis itself, but what we are refuting is the permanent sounds. It is the same case.
당연히 니 빠세데 상상해도 때문에 로션도 다달래서 되버다 자식으로
That's right.
대나 파파 요새 저 로벤이지 전에 장신 요나 당 랑게 뭐 요나 당 랑게 체니지 요나 당 제스 요나 당시 가바 송비 장신라 소바네 하템바 대다 대지바 샤라 대다 메바 템비 치나제 대야 마리베 셴바타제 대메바 템바 대다도 고와 샤오 송도 대바도 로샤 체닝 아니 자식.
The noble father Nagarjuna, his spiritual son Arideva, and the two master Buddha Palita and Chandrakriti refers their refutation by saying, if things exist intrinsically, if things existed essentially, if things exist by way of their own character, the way of their own intrinsic character, and if things exist substantially, you should understand that the intrinsic nature and so forth mentioned in this text is as indicated above. Also, you should understand that the words indicating those various things do exist mean that they do not exist as they are conceived by our ignorance.
대바지. 아저스 주바 강가 아니 리피 가자래 송와 주바 짐바데 세우라.
So all of those existing by way of their own character, the existing substantially, existing independently, and so forth, are to be negated by reasonings.
그만 줘봐서.
Let's take a 10 minutes break here.
Alright. 다 카톡 중이다. 당연히 니바 젠라 좀 저기 쳐봐 생긴다. 젠라 좀 저기 그런 말로 손은 거의 것도 되는 뭐 하는 거 생각. 젠라 니바 젠라 좀 저기 저기 추네 손도 je j'adore machin je gola soba te me bana me do shema wana cheba de jo me go ba de jendo sheja la ye ja de nga shi la ye ga de nga shi na yo ba nga shi na me ba na la na ja yu de ta de me ba jo ba na cheba de ja me go so jen yang so do
So let's read through the text again here. When to add qualification to the other object of negations, it says. When you say that the utter non-existence, such as the horn of a rabbit and the son of barren woman, do not exist, you need not attach a qualification such as intrinsically. Similarly, there are things that although existent among objects of knowledge, exist at some times and places, and do not exist at other times and places. When you say that this do not exist at a particular time or place, there's also no need to add that qualification.
다때 세부 세정을 로본 이라 열에서는 여말에서는 카투 케케체 말에 카투 내저 쪽으로 했었지. 변나 뒤은 가실라서 변나 맞아 가서고 딱 사노로라 강여를 해서도 야나 강노로라 사회를 해서도 또 유도 될 때나 카투 여말에서 내저는 마도 그 라신 여말에 세 가자데 제바데 자고 말에 해서 개차들 맞아 지일에 제바체 개차들.
So now it says no need to attach qualifications such as intrinsically. That means, for instance, when you talk about, the horn of rabbit or the son of barren woman. So we're talking about the non-existence of those things. And we do not need to add any qualification to this, attach a qualification to such as intrinsically or essentially. We don't need to do that. And similarly, if we were to ask that, is there a place where it's normally snows a lot? Is this place be hot? Then that is a non-existence of hot at this point, at this time, right? We don't need to add any qualification to that.
된대지. 제가 엄마 빼서 타네도 줘봐 면대봐 예 장신지 대봐 뭐마이 대봐 팀모 많이 봐 로다바 난고바 나 데라 대달라 소모다 자급이 급 가레마도 데라 랑게 응주비 장신시 제바 사드자 먹어대 대달라 대달라 된데 주타마와 대다게 켈란스비 셔로 송도.
Furthermore, when refuting imaginary construct from the unique assertions of Buddhist or non-Buddhist essentialists, things that Madhyamaka do not accept as conventional existence, there's no need to newly attach the qualification essentially or intrinsically to the object, except in the occasional situation when you should add it, taking into account the opponent's perspective.
대가 주타모 라라기 주틱다 켈렌제네 까지르마도 투모마이도 오마 탄지로 까거베 게마로 베나다 타바 켈렌발라 담 타바 마레세야도다 요 센자바기 데바토바레스 코론 데바타데 데바토 마이바 까나마 장시 주바 자거베 쳐바요 마레송도 사데 잠거데 네 주타모 라라 켈렌자지레마도 영업인의 시스템바 게마 마르 가자.
This is because those opponents of the tenets have already asserted the essential existence of those objects, essential objects of those objects. That's all.
대달의 신보 엄마 배 타니도 넘버 줘비 대나나네 진짜시 인장 대단고비 거스네 쳇바데 맞잖아 고케지 리바니라 준송바 주베 순지 땅는 바시데 좋아 자고서 손도.
And it says, in any other case whatsoever, where Madhyamaka do conventionally posit the object, right? If you fail to add a qualification when refuting it, then the fallacy you adduce will equally apply to your own critiques, and hence it will be only a sham of refutations. Thus, it must be added.
배가서 세보세장 ben 엄마 바기 탄예장도 주바지 아니 여 말에서나 시탄론도 그래 아니 여를 센서나 아니 가자 라신지 주반생이 가지 따지지 탄이데 아니 이제대 있는 방거로와 네바도 아니 배나 bomba 여 말에서 엄마 탄지 열로 bomba 여래 bomba 여 말은 뭐 가려 여 말에서 왜스 아니 탄예장도 여 말에서 왜나 아니 탄예장도 여래 근데 라시 좀 아니 여러 세계나 아니 라시 좀 여 말했으네. 가셔도는 거 그래서 탄예자도 영향라 라시 여매 이제된는 지된도 가 그래서 하듯이.
So here now in the Madhyamaka Prasangika's the point of view that things does exist conventionally, right? That Madhyamaka Prasangika is not refuting the conventional existence of the things in event. So if one refute the conventional existence of the things in event, then one is falling into one of the extreme views. And then on the other hand, if one again here, if one if one accepts things exist intrinsically, again one is falling into one of the extreme views. In order to free oneself of these two extreme views, one should have understanding of things exist conventionally but do not exist intrinsically.
배는 같이 지지 때문에 자가제도 배는 주여 말해서 나게나 아니 주여 말해서 주여다 매게네 제바 가게 된데 된 거래 아니 탄예자도 여매게시나 장주지 아니 라시 좀 여래서는 여 말해 아니 대 라시 좀 여 말해 생겼다 라시 여매게 제바 되게 아니 뭐 가서 다 지자서지 맞아와이나 아니 주여다 매생인데 주지지 참아 여매래 근데 주면도 주지지 참아 매 그래 대단한 라니 조시지 참아야 샤두고 말해 선 and didn't do it.
No, so let's take an example of the form, the object form. So when it comes to observing form, we're not actually rejecting actual existence of the form itself. What we should understand is we're refuting the form exists intrinsically. There exists an intrinsic existence of the form or the essential or the substantial existence of the form. That is being refuted. We're not refuting the form itself, but rather in the Madhyamaka Prasangika's point of view, one accepts, they possess strongly, completely on the existence of the form, the conventional existence of the form. But what it's refuting is the intrinsic characteristic of the form.
배는 가서 싫어님 번호를 줌에 담에는 창조만 저자데 부모가보다 더 라시제 가서 말로 양다고 just 따오세네 아니 타마텔라 라시제 마주고 라는 자아리마도 아니 그 줌에 봐도 매바 찍고 장바치를 자매와.
For instance, when we read the Heart Sutra, where it states that there's no form, no sound, taste, and so on and so forth. But at the end, it says all the five skandhas do not exist intrinsically or do not exist essentially. So we're not, and that Heart Sutras doesn't indicate that everything doesn't exist, but rather it indicates very clearly at the end, it says all the skandhas and five skandhas and so forth doesn't exist intrinsically.
텔레코디아시나 싫어님 번호 줌에 생이데 주 라시제 매발라 자그레스 데레 비자마제세 데레 자그레 주 라시 매발라 자그레스 데레 된다.
So what I'm trying to say here is now when we talk about there's no form in this which is stated in the statement that we find in the Heart Sutra, it actually states that form doesn't exist intrinsically. That is what is being refuted in the Heart Sutra.
제아사 마셰바타 오마베 타니도 주비 되나라 장신 유메 주비 리바다 타니비 세메 메네바시 거데 데타 데타 마이나 온실로 소바 타니도 ke mele la zula soba ke lembi cheba ten mirong ye dendawa ne lang yin no dendawa ne lang ma yin no juta de deta to te do deta to me te to she la sobi jeten ba da jeten len de bi na ja kan yang she to me ba ran jin je tong ba la kon de je na ja tang je te bi che mirong ye she ro so do.
Moreover, they explained earlier that neither reasoning consciousness, which analyze whether something exists intrinsically, nor at conventional valid cognition uh, can contradict with the Madhyamakas posit conventionally. For if either did, it would be utterly untenable to make the distinctions that we do not conventionally assert things such as divine creator, yet we do assert forms, sounds, and such. Hence, there would be no way to make a presentation of the mundane and supermundane, such as this is the path, that is not the path, or this tenet is correct and that is not correct. Consequently, there's this distinguishing feature that all presentation of the cyclic existence in nirvana are tenable within the emptiness of the intrinsic existence would be impossible.
되게 된다 지치 있는 자는 가르세고선 주 생에데 지치 있는 수된 조용 베거라 주 랑시치 주마두게 제바 쟁에 되게 아니 주로 면에 봐 제거래스 아니 주 타니도 여러 생에 세마 코노기 주로 면에 봐 지거래 마도 아니 샤시지 나 제 개그 말해서
So now what we are saying here is now when one is analyzing the form, actual mode of existence of the form, one's analytical idea should not, refute the form itself. When we are analyzing the actual mode of existence of the form, we should not, refute the form itself. If one does this, then one is actually contradicting to the valid cognition that cognizes the form itself. So here we are not refuting the form, the conventional existence of the form, the mere form. We are refuting. We should understand that our refutation, our target is to refute the essential existence or the substantial existence of the form.
되지. 다 차차선 시에는 된주기 유명이 제바 정에대 예시 코노 시대에서 다 간제 된주기 나였지 마대나 아니 코아다 냥엘인데 비게 나자대 되게 말해서.
So therefore, then it says that if one is unable to have a distinguishing feature, that all the presentation of the cyclic existence in nirvana are tenable within the emptiness of the intrinsic existence would be impossible. That's what it means.
당어서 데려와 주 랑신 메버토베 세마테 주 랑신 주도 마주 쟁에 세마테 되게 줄을 내고 말어 아스 지지 아니 주 코로 타니도 여러 생에 주 조지 세마 타니비 세마 되게 줄을 내고 말어 아스 그래 주단에 세마니 여러 주 있다.
So now the form and the valid cognition that cognize non-intrinsic existence of the form doesn't actually refute the form itself, and similarly the form being lack of essential existence, understanding of that cognized valid cognition doesn't actually harm or the or the refute the form itself. The form is not being refuted at all.
아야 대단하사 너 대단한 체면 면에 장 대 말에 된 고반되나네 개바 시게 전에 이노 스르와 다가서 다지지 요매기 제바 징에 되게 줄을 내고 말에다 좀 고르셀로이나 아니 개바 게모셔이 계셔래 에서
So then it says to a skillful philosopher, it is ridiculous to claim that something is refuted, even though such valid cognition do not contradict it.
ngā te che. Chidā ngā tō lō te ki ngō mō ngō se kē kāla nē bī tō nō ngō tō mā tō tā kā tsē chi nyāng tō lē chū tō sō nō kē yō mā rō wā.
So when we talk about, refuting or the negating something, it should be one's negation of something should be based on logical understanding.
Yāng tēndrē yōng chō kō rē pē nā dāngzēn lēn chē pāng yō tē kāla dāngzēn lēn chē tō sō kō rāngshū chī pāng rō yō tē yōng kō rē.
However, sometimes, when we are, eliminate, when one is able to eliminate this innate grasping at self, then as a virtue of being this, one can eliminate the innate grasping at self being permanent.
Te che, te che. Shi kē nē yin wā chī pē nā sā. Te tāng gō bā sōng bī kāw sū nē dōyā mē sā wā chē pā tē yā wā shā wō chī. Dē yā shī chā pīn chē pā tāng rī pā chū chū pīn chē pā. Nē gā shā gō bā nā chē pā tē yā wā chē mā wā nā lā sā. Tsā shī yōng tāng bī tā pā lī tā tāng cī sē tāng jō pā tsā tē tāng yā yu kāw tē mā nā yé cī sō chē wā lā zī pā tāng. Ma xia yang xia wa dian nang ju ne ju to la wa la gong ne ma xia yu gao se yang xia ge ba yin de song de. Da zhou ma zhe qi ba zhong zhe jiang mei bi xiu lo song de de pa de lo xia ji. Ni wo ma se de ne ci suo qian bu cha de sa.
Therefore, when stating that you refute those phenomena, such as forms, you should be sure at the qualifying to add a qualification phrase. Chandraketu's commentary on the 400th stanza and commentary on the 60th stanzas of reasonings very often add qualifying phrase when refuting the object to be negated. Such phrases frequently appears in Nagarjuna's fundamental deities, in Buddha Palita's commentary on the fundamental deities, and in Chandraketu's clear word and commentary on the middle way, along with this explanation of the middle way commentary.
Tende jense kare shiwa sana zhong nu yoba na yi tanda chuzo la rangshi jo yoma re sene gaze kono zhong nu yoba na yi changwa yi na chuzo chenpo shui chano degi ma jia yin ye songwa re. Tanji na yi bendo zu me dra me se yi tama de la deda tang rangshi me ma zhuwa yang to dao se yoba na yi kuwa de lengo re se kesa de re.
So whenever we find that there's no the selflessness or something, selflessness of person or selflessness of phenomena, and so on and so forth, and there's emptiness of this, emptiness of that, just as we find in the Heart Sutra, there's no form, no sound, no taste, and so forth. Once understanding of not non-existence of intrinsic sound, non-existence of the intrinsic forms, tests, and so forth. And similarly, in this, it says if we don't have to add this qualification, qualifying phrase each and every phenomena, because there will be a lot. But rather, whenever we find that something that doesn't exist and it's empty of this, empty of that, one should understand the empty of an intrinsic existence, emptiness of essentially existence, or the emptiness of independent existence.
Maya, Chetan desi mocha tani ina meshe, nga zo chetan ngaro yu pe ngaro pa nolo re, di tanda juta ina re, yo pa mayi me pa mayi sengi ge, tanda ge, ta hashan ki tawa chima chi chen de ina meshe, da kanchi tanda ge juta mobo chungwa rwa, tso pa, tanda ge kao tang tenne desi ge yungu ya na.
So in the earlier dissemination of the Buddha's teaching in Tibet, and those earlier philosophers, there are many who have this view of neither existent nor non-existent, and so on and so forth, and which is also known as the view of Hashang. In order to refute those views, and here we find this elaborate explanation on what is being refuted and what is not being refuted.
number she bana, you pa main no she number she be chiba jawa mondo shon de eje. They are Mashibata ranking Tuna yin su should be repeat near go but le money be ranking to be dome jeba yinbe. Ranking to be ranching me jeba town ne jitu toba shade jijabin reba le sondo.
So thus those authors regard the repetition of the qualifying phrase as excessive verbiage, and they thought that significance of this, having added them at a certain point, would make it easily understood, even when they did not. So you should add it even where they did not, because there is not a slightest difference between the place where they did not add it, and then place where they did not. And furthermore, they frequently add a qualification of analyzers, saying when analyzed it does not exist, as explained above. This means that if something exists, essentially it would have to be found by reasoning consciousness, which analyze the way it exists. However, it is not found, and therefore the essential existence of object does not exist. Hence, you should analyze this, make the same point as saying it does not exist essentially or intrinsically, for this is as Chandrakirti's commentary on the 400 stanza says.
네. 따뜻하게 거기 가서 거기 가는 랭거스나 배나 주 장경 배나 뭐 주세는 뭐를 가서 사이는 뭐 주세나 아니 그런 거는 주 그래. 뭐 예를 수기 뭐 예를 좀뭐 주바지야나 아니 뭐 주다 주두다 문두세나 따지 쟁이 되게 예 그래서 되게 많이 받더라. 아니 장시제 마주 봐서 그래서 된다 되지.
So to sum up the meaning of the phrase that we have that we read earlier, that now when we go through the critical analysis of actual mode of existence of form, when one applies one's analysis, free of contradictory, or when one is able to apply correctly, analysis correctly, one will be able to find the form doesn't exist intrinsically, as it appears to our ignorance. And that is what is meant by one is able to have a proper gain the proper understanding of actual mode of form, actual mode of existence of the form, not being able to form not being exist intrinsically or essentially.
나서 때릴 때마다 뭐 주나 때려봐 제단지나 때방게서 뭐 주나 라지 주 라운이 주 그래 라운이 주려나 제단지나 때나 가와리 와스.
So we find in the praise to dependent originations by Lama Tsongkhapa, where it states that if one finds something that exists, it's in and of itself by its own side, then one's understanding of one's notion of this something that dependently existent, something that dependent upon causes and conditions is contradictory.
아저기 되게 내로 nengo다 가르치고서는 조소지 취하다 소 나다 취하다 나다 용수 줘봐기 내루세대 가르쳐야지 계시시고로 아니 내루세대 아니 그 조여래 조 코로나만 줘야래 뭐네 젠 때는 요래 아니 젠 때는 나 가르치 따당 가르쳐야지 뭐 비네시 장이 돈의 신주 젠 계시고로.
So what we are doing here is now ultimately we are talking about actual mode of things and event, including self and phenomena. How all these phenomena exist. What is the actual mode of existence of the self? What is the actual mode of existence of the phenomena? And how things that exist. Is things exist by dependent upon other factors, or things actually exist without depending on other factors? This is what we are doing now. This is that analysis that we are conducting.
대인은 가서 지원데 다나 가서 지원데 계획에 통을 말. 저 가르치는 통을 말해서는 변은 저런게 준바지 담바서는 엔텔라 차단되네. 아니 거의 라와 되는 코드도 있을 때 내가 돼.
So the main point here is that what we are, point is that we are, having a notion of something that is non-existence as an existence. It is because of this notion one is then uncontrollably revolving within this unenlightened existence.
통만 매반에 저 단다벌에 잘라지마텔라 아니 링아 예소 텔라 럭게네. 아니 배제단에 되는샤 대기처럼 야제지로 하면도스.
So therefore it says that from the beginningless time up until now, we grasp onto something that is completely non-existence as existence. Hence, we are unable to develop our spiritual realizations. We are unable to enhance our spiritual realizations.
근데 인사 말했으니지 로컬에 대해서 제반에 지잖아 로아 로라마 보는 동반이 세이 뒤서고 시에도 거라 시비 거라 로데버처럼 항상 주면서 차르면서 된다서는 또나 아니 상추선에 돈이도 로데를 로를 차대와 그랬어요.
So, although when we go through the explanation of emptiness, the idea of emptiness is kind of when you look at those statements are quite enigmatic and very convoluted. However, if you really carefully analyze, it is said that understanding of emptiness is far more, obvious or far more easier, much easier than the understanding of bodhicitta.
야. 근데 이제 어떻게 변화 예팅의 산원지의 땅 변동반이 걸 강지 정의나 변화 가서 소소이나래 변화 세디게 풍부될 신주 지전에 가바의 진로도 그래. 아니 되네 지 소소게 타는 소소 세디게 파면 받을 지가 로도 그러. 때니요 도지.
For instance, if we think about how we are dependently existence, one can think of how we are, if we think very carefully, one can really be able to, have this understanding of how our existence is dependent upon others, dependent upon, causes and conditions, all the way to one's own parents and so forth. One is able to relate this, the notion of dependent existence of self.
라바도 변화가 하세게 되게 철학이 논제사도 호론 철학을 봐 카랑로로의 신주쟁에는 철학이 하생에 대 풍보를 지는 것이 저기도 대례신께 되면지어 사진 것이 저기도 해서는 대례선은 동시지도.
And particularly when we think about an I or self, then one can also take a time to think about, reflect one's mind upon how the self is existed. What is meant by I? How do I actually, how am I actually identifying the self? Am I identifying my aggregates, such as form and so forth, are identifying as a self, or is it something else? So there's always a way that we can reflect one's mind upon that, and to be have a proper understanding of how self is actually dependent upon others.
등대지 신조제된 것을 좋다 뭐 제가 지금 풍복 나가 강사를 생에 풍복을 생에 타는 런지 같은 저제 내대 때도 집에 다들 생기 이제 나시 자서 봐도 지도라.
No. So it is therefore then we find in our own philosophical tenets, the lower philosophical tenets, there are some they identify one's combination of this psychophysical aggregate as a self or person, and there's some such as Madhyamaka, Swatantika and below, they're particularly the Madhyamaka Swatantikas identify the subtle most consciousness as a self or I or person.
예, 등저 같은 신조제 제는 장들 소소게 냐네스 개체뭐 거 말이 지지 제 갈래 저거 말이 맞대는 산도 또 지로.
So this is how we should analyze. We don't have to put in rigorous effort on that, but rather one should just be on the place where one is and then reflect one's mind upon that, how I or self that is existed, and then to try to identify the actual mode of existence of the self.
그래서 토미 타이어 말이 아니 또 다tan지 저거세 대세기 시지 되는 자비 걸라니 고아데 갈래 가고 차거라.
So then when we talk about as beginning,
나 생이들 자네로 나 생이데 아니 토미 타이어 말이 토미 타면 또 다tan지 해서데 천지 집에 가사지라. 아니 근데 지체 나도 아니 토마메도 내용에 제가 또 다tan지 간제전 요거를 생인데
so then when it's when one then reflect one's mind upon the self that is being exists from the beginningless time, and then when we talk about the beginningless time, then it becomes a little harder for us.
시제 빈제발레 게테 모본데다 알랭게메 콜로 당 주발라 소바다 로아 모본메바 민제 나네 데이생예 바테베 넘버시바나 살레달라 소바다 랑게 치 세와 미번저나 대단히 시진 로상지 지진 인베 넘버시비 넘버시비 메세바나 랑게 모메바 민조아 민조아 마이노 시송소 소도.
And then it says, or it says, as Chandrakriti's commentary on the 400 stanza says, since they are deceptive, like the will of firebrand, and emanation, or such. So these things become non things. If they did not, then under existing rational analysis, their essence would be very clearly observable, as in the case of Goldsmith analyzing gold. However, their causes are strictly erroneous, so that when the fire of analysis burns them, they can never be anything but essentialist. But essenceless, sorry.
nga tsoki naka chuji yonga ki pena shi yuba de katu de chi la ni pegi oka de pu ni chi ni shu chenpo kondo be ka la gogo gochi ju thong ro juba so de chi yana juba de ngo bi yi ne zi thong ma do ko juba yi ba kya thong ma ro de se ko lo ngo ye ne zi yi ba de re we sa na ngo bi ne zi de ba ma re pena sale da se de se re do se yi me de ni se je da song je ne ni se yi me ta gu do dendrü tabi kala yu ngubi nesile neba chi chiso na tanya tsando yoba jogoro as. Te nangye ki soso chi chi kanda chi na rashi chi chuma chuba ngubi ten tachi chenen jo tunge chi gogoro ta tseme meneba chi.
So when we talk about establishing something that exists conventionally, or something that exists, lack of something that exists devoid of intrinsic existence, one should be able to establish by one's valid cognitions, because it is not that something that one grasps onto something that non-existence as a mode of existence of something. For instance, the will of fire band. When we have when we hold the fire, and then when you move this circular when you we will able to see the ring of fire, but it's not. However, it's not so. But for us, it is a ring of fire, but it's not a ring of fire. It's just a mere the the stick that has a fire on it, and it's due to the movement of that you see the ring of the fire. But when it stopped, then you will see the actual reality of this fire. And similarly, something that is, it talks about the emanation right here, something that is emanated by, conjured by the magician and so on and so forth. Although that's something that appears to oneself as something that really existed. However, it's not so. It is a completely, something that is conjured by the magicians, but it doesn't actually exist as it appears to our ignorance, or appears to our own ordinary conceptions. So therefore, when we think about establishing something that is non-existence of intrinsic existence, one should always remember that your understanding of this is something that doesn't contradict it by the valid cognition that cognize actual mode of existence.
야, 내가 제 가서 내가 추종 이 추는 게 됐어요. 신주 집에 가라. 아니, 때는 매바 차가 면도 와서 가셔라. 아니, 대나게 근데 장시지 마주 받제 집에 가라. 아니, 타녀때 매바 차고 말해서도 집에 주민도.
So the main thing that we should understand is when we are going through the analysis of non-existence of lack of intrinsic existence, we should not think of the basis that is basis upon which that your analysis is taking place. The basis should not be refuted, but the basis being intrinsic existence should be refuted or negated.
somba 가자를 때도 제가 잠자 시바네 송이지도 모두 때에 나와디 타마래도 그래서 좋아요나 좋아지다 되면은 이 마테슬로나로 처음에 그래서 저녁에 나와지기 타마들랑 좋아요는 지자지 고거지와 때를 가면 맞지도 아유 스케치 들어지다.
We have 5 more minutes, and if you have questions, we'll take this some questions. Otherwise, I'll read through the text again. I'll continue reading through the text.
이제 도바 사투가 맞다 도바 저절이 되다. 아이 좀 몇살에 좀면 당연히 뭐 뒤도 이동지도 될로네 사셔도 sombaga gajala tenda je chepa ja meja shepa ne sa gajala tenda je chepa ja wa oma ranji ba kuni lus ma wa ne che merite juba junje de jewi long tang ba le so de sedan dem ba ranjo yang ju to ma le to ba me ji ngba to ba me dang ranjo je ma ba sedan dem ba shari bu to ba yu ngba to ba yu 말이 여 매지 니지 취지네 마이노 세단데 샤레고 터바다 응음바 또바는 제 된제 타녀도 인라 준도 쇼바다 레지 쇼 오하다 쇼미오 자장바다랑 상제다 상추 삼바양 제 된제 타녀도 인제 대당반에 터바 매지 응음바 또바 매도 셰 somba tato kelang goban junjele somba de ranji bi ndo yin xie ma de xie de nge de jun do na de ta bi che ba jawa xie de ma na ngo so to ni de je ba le chang on de ba de lo ro chen xia xia.
So whether to add qualification ultimate to the object of negation, it is quite unreasonable to claim that adding the qualification ultimate to the object of negation is a procedure only in Svadhantika Madhyamaka. But Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way or the commentary recites the perfection of Wisdom Sutra in the 25,000 lines, or the Vimasi Sivasarki Sariki Paramita. The Venerable Sharpada, it is that there is no attainment and no clear knowledge. Subhati answered, Venerable Sharpada, there is an attainment and there is also a clear knowledge, but not in the dualistic sense. Venerable Sharpada, attainment and a clear knowledge exists as a worldly conventions. Also, the stem enterers, and once enters or never returners, arhats, pratika Buddhas, and bodhisattvas exist worldly conventions, but ultimately, however, there is no attainment and there is no clear knowledge.
그래서
Also,
어떻게 대받으자 되게 대자 아니 가서 안에 돈이 되는 바빠다.
Chandra Krishna's explanation of the middle way commentary says that you should follow this statement. Do you claim that this is the Savatantika Sutra? It is evident that these are a great many such cases where definitive sutra add the qualifications, ultimate. So also the Nagarjuna's 70 stanzas on the emptiness says. Let's read.
그렇지. 등은 되게 되자이. 아니 대령아서 추수 지다 시에서 집에 가서 다 돈이 제여져래. 근데 뭐냐 돈이 이게 대 투바상지 시바셔고 저거서 다 대대 잡으면 가정 가서게 아니 원벌류도 받은 나와 잡아내 소대네 지 뭐네 다 가르사가 사모 따위쇼라 근데 로카쇼되게 아니 대다 용된라 평에 대다라 안 투사고 소체게 안 뒤에 대해서 지라바 대요 교와서 뭐였으나 가와다 집에 돈에 아니 장시 세제 단지 지라 아니 상추 생게 생베 돈에 돈이 또 베실라 손되네 저랑지래 제네 아니 뇨아뇨아 아니 손주주 고모녀도 타봐 아니 제게 제네 반되는 수가 넘어서 더 되게 신절로도 소서 아니 뭐하다 뭐하다로 지다.
So now let's dedicate our mirrors at the end of first teacher, as we usually do. By having this, may I dedicate all my merits towards all sentient beings, the merits that I accumulated by having the discussions on this profound view of emptiness that is being stated, that is being taught by great Indian masters of the Nagarjuna and his spiritual, disciples, Chandrakritis. Their teachings very profound, based on their own understanding, the experiential understanding of the profound emptiness. So we are having this a very little time of having to be able to discuss on this. It's a very fortunate, and for all of us. So may oneself and all other sentient beings be able to generate this wisdom realizing emptiness, and may I be able to establish all other sentient beings to the state of unity or state of complete enlightenment by means of generating this wisdom realizing emptiness and bodhicitta.
안덕에 진인 사빈 개원데 대당 조와 킹라 강변 처번 주든 로선 조보 대변인 보전도 세제 소소저 요저면 도정 제로리제 년대 전본데 선제 신도 민대 배워 조근 나다 신로 조보 제와 근도 양다 나마다 제미 최제 변라 노제지 사도 노제 윤데 라조 도제 청계 고보녀도 조 예당 구르르 멘제는 양다요 에미 데네른도 변에 소년 Kata yamba kanshi sabba de lomi mare ke don jawan nangre jaye ombo da je de ma sube sero ke doi jambe yang je sebe je zon ne de bi rinpa ke san lang je nye ne zhu be je na nye shi shu rang ke je je do be lang je 修道自愿当愿当给真主意一直明白自见，教育电报有人人就见，电报人间出给马教，教教娘报就别说的呢，你就准备一让就报，别的对对是我是我就自见教育没用真的。列柱上求能觉人别将，唐德能觉一能别的，教育自保人都终究结，能藏主别听见主席，各尽世界莫当秘密根，赛罗更多家园安保，能当这我们就结，刚才得把就能解决，最近住了怎么的月。土地能觉大都出现金，扎西将子若根敲就金，就是那面古菜老点金，南瓜城的数据接报，罗桑对比正面上送，若叶面色大多年就金，扛着照片过于心康，便当的我马的教育的。行者在我的人叫做小百姓贴不多点就见，江北保佑皆大钱包，更多上报点样点心的，得到根据就算到了，给我得到堂前绕的我，就从西边叫我堂前。我刚了出多俺把的，大钱给月早晚的给。容不只是劳动我。